Last week we talked about the purest worship that we can find out of Revelation chapter 4 and 5. We see these great living creatures. We see the kings coming down off their thrones. We see the angelic host. Then we see every creature proclaiming with a loud voice that God is worthy to be praised. You know, we don't wait till we get to heaven to do that. We're to be worshipers right now. So in this series, we're talking about how we worship, and we're also going to be talking about what we don't do in worship. And so a fascinating passage is found in Psalm 100, but before we get to that, I would like to give you a definition of worship that came from one of my seminary professors. He wrote a fascinating book on worship. I was actually there while he was writing the book, and I got to see it firsthand as it unfolded. But listen to this definition by Dr. Daniel Block about what worship is. True worship involves reverential human acts of submission and homage before the divine sovereign and respond to his gracious revelation of himself and in accordance with his will. And so, here we see that worship involves reverential, that means honoring actions. And they go before the divine sovereign, that is God. He is divine, that means he's holy, he is God. And sovereign means he's in charge of everything. He's the big boss, so to speak. And so we do this in response to his gracious love for us, these things that he's done for us that we don't deserve that are good. And more importantly, we do it in accordance with his revealed will. In other words, there are ways that we are supposed to worship, and there are ways that we're not supposed to worship. So let us look now at an earthly worship scene. It comes out of the book of Psalms, and it's Psalm 100. You may even have this one memorized, but let us read it together. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Now we're going to stop right there because I want you to see something. Who in this passage is invited to come? That's our first question. You guys spend a few moments and just see if you can figure out who is invited to come in this passage. We see in this passage something that's extremely important throughout scriptures. We don't invite God to come. God invites us to come. He's the divine sovereign. He's the king. We don't invite the king to get down off his throne and come to our home. He sits on his throne and he invites us to come before him. That's what we saw last week in Revelation 3 and 4. We see that, 3 and 4. 4 and 5, thank you, 4 and 5. We see that he's on the throne. We're invited to come. As a matter of fact, one of the great words in all of Scripture is come. Because in our sin, we would not be allowed to come. But God invites us to come, and he's the one that makes us right so that we can be before him. I want you to get that. A lot of worship today involves people trying to get God to come into their presence. That's not how it works. As a matter of fact, we even have in churches a prayer called the prayer of invocation, which means we're invoking God to come. We don't do that here because it is God who invites us to come, and we graciously respond by giving him our attention and turning our focus onto him. Now, in that first passage that we just read, there's a couple other things that I want you to consider before we move on. So let's go to the second question, again, based upon that first part of the passage. Why should our worship be joyful? Why should we sing joyful songs to God? And let me ask you this. Is your worship joyful? Do you sing joyfully before your God? Just pause and discuss that. Let's move on with the rest of the verse. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Obviously a very short psalm, but a psalm that is packed with great information. Let's ask this question. Why is knowing, he says, know that the Lord is God. Why is knowing so important in worship? Why is it such an important part of worship? And as we continue, what is it in this passage that we are to know? We cannot worship unless we know. This involves revelation. God has revealed himself to us, and as Dr. Block said earlier, that we respond according to his revelation. He is revealing himself to us. We respond. It is not the other way around. We don't act trying to get God to respond. He has acted. We respond. He is our shepherd. We respond as sheep. Here it's important to know who he is, who we are, and his attributes, and our attributes, and how we all relate. What is it we're to know in this passage? He's our God. We're his people. We're the sheep of his pasture. And so we relate to God by acknowledging that he's God and we're not. That we belong to him, not he belongs to us. And that we are submissive to him like the sheep are submissive to the shepherd. And so let us just go back. We shout for joy. Why? Because we have so much to be thankful for. Because there is a God who loves us and cares for us. And though we have sinned, he still invites us to come in. He's the one who cleans us up. By his grace and his mercy, we have access to him. When the king invites you before his throne, you should be happy. And as you go into his presence, you do so with thanksgiving. And you do so with praise. And you do so with joy. And you do so singing praises to the God who is worthy. And as you go, you know this, that he's God and you're not and I'm not. And we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. And so we respond to him accordingly. That's worship. Today in our message, we talked a lot more about it. I hope you have time to really listen to the message. But in the meantime, I want you to think about this. How do we approach God? We approach him with humility and praise and thanksgiving. Why can we approach God? Because he has been gracious to us. And what do we do as we approach God? We give him praise, we sing thanksgiving, and we honor him because he is worthy. Thank you for joining me today.